Hi. We're going to be reading you your bedtime story. Well, I'm going to be reading you your bedtime story. Winston doesn't know how to read very well. This is Winston, and yeah, yeah. And he just jumped on my lap because I was eating a flatbread for lunch. And he still smells the flatbread. Huh? Yeah, you smell the flatbread and you want some. Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Hey, I have to read. I have to read. Are you giving me a hug? I know, you like to give hugs. He likes to give hugs. It's kind of awkward because he's a dog. Huggy huggies. Okay. Are you going to get down? Okay. All right, here we go. So we left off when two men were going to go find Lansford Hastings on the trail. Remember, he was guiding another wagon train that was ahead of the Donner Party. "Goodbye, Pa. Come back soon," she called bravely, and Mrs. Reed added a devout, "God keep you," as he kissed her and mounted his horse. Everyone was waving and shouting as he and the two other horsemen who had volunteered to go with him clattered off down the canyon road. So three, including Mr. Reed, decide to go ahead and talk to Lansford Hastings. They're going to try to talk him into guiding them. For 5 days, the rest of the company camped in the meadows at the head of the canyon and waited for Mr. Reed to return. Some blamed him for trusting Hastings, but all were ready to forgive him if he brought Hastings back. George trusted him too. We all did, Tamsin Donner reminded them. All except you, Mother, Elitha and Leanna said. Will he come back and show us the way? Asked Virginia and Patty. Where's Pa? Pa will show us, the little children said. By August 11th, everyone was worried. So they could have turned around and gone back. They're just wasting time sitting there waiting for them to bring Lansford Hastings back. And guess what? Lansford Hastings isn't going to come back with them, right? So they, in the time that they wasted just sitting there, they could have turned around and gone back to the Oregon Trail and gotten back on that trail and gotten away from the shortcut. Let's see. By August 11th, everyone was worried. What had happened to the three men who had volunteered to ride ahead and overtake Hastings? Provisions were getting low and time was running out. If they didn't get started soon, they'd never reach the mountains ahead of the snow. Toward evening, the hoofbeats of several horses were heard down the canyon road, but they turned out to be only echoes. Mr. Reed was alone. He was not riding his gray racing mare, Glaucus. This was a different horse. Hastings let me have him. Yes, I saw him, Mr. Reed said bitterly. I begged him to come back with me, but he was in a hurry to push on across the desert with the wagons ahead of us. The dry drive may be as much as 50 miles, he says now. Before it was 30, more angry words followed against Hastings. Doesn't he know? Why wouldn't he come back and guide us the way he promised? Was he afraid of getting lost? Perhaps. We may have to send searchers ahead for the men who were with me. Their horses gave out the same as mine. I left them at Hastings Camp by a big black rock that will serve as a landmark. Hastings showed me the road we must take from a mountain ridge. Is it a good road, Pa? It was Virginia who asked the question, but everyone was listening for the answer. Mr. Reed shook his head. There is no road, daughter, not even a trail for part of the way. I made notes and blazed trees, but we must cut our way step by step. The canyon road Hastings took is far too dangerous. One of his wagons was dashed to pieces over a precipice. The others were lowered by ropes. We can't risk that, George Donner declared. For once, the whole party was in agreement. It would be better to travel across the mountains following the trail Mr. Reed had blazed. They started the following morning. So now they're, instead of taking the shortcut, they're taking Mr. Reed's path that he took back from Hastings. They started the following morning. It was slow work with axes and shovels. as they soon found they must break the way through heavy underbrush. Sometimes there were hollows to be filled up before the wagons could get across. Up, up they toiled to the top of the first divide, then down to find the going even worse. So this is the picture of their wagon. Like, you can imagine trying to be in little teeny narrow mountains and canyons with these big huge covered wagons. Especially the Reed family's palace wagon was huge. The top-heavy wagons were in constant danger, especially the Reed's palace car. It did tip, and once it nearly went over. Hastings Precipice can't be much worse than this, the man who righted it began to complain. The road was now being cut along a dangerous side hill with a creek at the bottom. A tangled mass of willows mixed with berry briars and other trees that grew beside the bank. It took days to clear a road. While the men worked, the children gathered berries and brought them back to camp. "We'll make our provisions last," they said to each other as they plopped the delicious ripe berries into their pails. They were still picking when they heard what they thought was the call to supper. It had suddenly grown too dark for them to see the berries. An owl hooted at them. Or was it an owl? "It sounds like a man hollering," Virginia said. "Maybe it's Mr. Stanton or one of the searchers Pa sent." "No, Jimmy," Patty objected. "It's someone in a wagon. You can see the white top moving through the trees." All right, so now the next chapter is called A New Family. "I hope it is a wagon," Mary Donner whispered. "Of course it is. What else could it be?" asked her brother George, as he took her hand and they all hurried back to camp with their berries. Virginia shivered a little, understanding how Mary felt. She was just beginning to expect trouble, but not Patty and Jimmy. The little children all rushed forward to greet the newcomers. 3 wagons, canvas-covered and top-heavy like their own, were just pulling in. "Ho there!" the driver shouted. "Is this the Donner party? They told us at Fort Bridger that if we came along right smart, we'd soon overtake you. My name's John Snyder, teamster for Uncle Billy Graves." The older girls tried not to stare. John Snyder was young and handsome, but he looked as if he was already taken. A girl with a frame of bobbing curls around a determined oval face stepped up and announced, "I'm Mary Graves. My father would like to join your train." This is bad. This is going to cause problems. Psst, warning. This is going to cause problems. "Another Mary," Mary Donner whispered. "That makes 3 of us." 4, Virginia said, counting my favorite cousin back in Illinois. "This Mary is a young lady, though. Don't you wish we were grown up and could charm the young men the way she does? You and Mary Murphy won't stand a chance with this Mary along." "Who cares?" the youngest of the Marys answered. "By the time we're old enough to get married, we'll be in California going to Aunt Tam's school." Did someone mention school? A sigh was heard from the 3 younger Graves girls, Eleanor, Lavinia, and Nancy, who now introduced themselves. A married sister, Sarah, and her husband, Jay Fosdick, a grown-up son named Billy after his father, 2 little boys and a baby girl completed the family. "There are 13 of us," Uncle Billy finished the introductions. That's an unlucky number, isn't it? "I hope that won't bring you bad luck. We've already had ours." "You mean the resin Indians?" the teamster John Snyder asked with a meaning glance towards the others. Soon the amusing story was passed around the camp. It seemed there had been a prairie fire back in Missouri, and the tall resin weeds standing between the flames and the circle of wagons had been mistaken for attacking Indians. "Our brave boys rushed forth and overcame the weeds with very little difficulty, didn't they, Bill?" John finished the story. "We did drive off a band of Sioux warriors who tried to capture Mary and make a squaw of her," young Bill boasted when the laughter had subsided. "The Sioux chief let go of her horse quick enough when I leveled my rifle at him." "Did you shoot?" the little boys asked, crowding closer to see the newcomers. "Didn't have to," was the reply, followed by more laughter. Virginia said nothing of her experiences. She no longer had her pony, so why talk about him? While they were berry picking the next day, she did tell the Graves girls about the chief who had wanted to buy her and her pony, but they wouldn't believe her. "You're just copying my sister Mary," Eleanor Graves said with a toss of her head, and Lavinia agreed with her. Only Nancy made friends with them. Patty invited her to a doll's tea party. Virginia, feeling the unfriendliness of the older girls, joined them to pour the tea. "It's really milk," she explained, "but there are berries to go with it." "Plum pudding," Patty said, playing lady. "Will you have some, Miss Graves?" While the children played, the men pitched in and helped with the road making, singing as they worked. There was singing around the campfires in the evening again, and for a while everything looked brighter. Then John Snyder's temper flared up, and the others joined him in complaining. "We hired out as teamsters, not ditch diggers," they all agreed. So all the people that are driving the oxen on the wagons are starting to get mad because instead of driving the wagons, they're having to build roads and paths for the wagons, right? So they're getting kind of grumpy about that. Cutting a road wide enough for the wagons to pass through the narrow gorge at the creek bottom had not been an easy task. Instead of coming out into open country, they had found the way blocked by another mountain. It was so high that all the oxen and some of the cows had to be yoked together to pull the wagons over. With locked wheels, they slid down the other side, only to find a ravine so deep that they would have to fill it in with tree trunks before they could get across. "Well, how do you like that?" Milt Elliott exclaimed, looking downward. "Anybody feel like chopping down a few trees?" Whether they felt like it or not, the job had to be done. Some of the strongest young men were still out searching. Finally, the lost men were found. Their horses were gone, and they were nearly starved. "We've got bad news for you," Stanton said. "That mountain you just crossed is nothing to the one ahead." Hastings had nothing good to say about the Wasatch Mountains. So I used to live in Utah, and the Wasatch Mountains are the mountain range. It's the mountain range that's just on the edge between Utah and Wyoming. And if you've ever been in the Wasatch Mountains, one time my brother-in-law, we rented these like sort of dune buggy cars to drive around through the mountains. And it was really fun, but it was really scary because there were lots of ups and downs. And I kept thinking as we were in the dune buggies what it would be like to be dragging a wagon through all of these little tiny narrow spaces that were really full of trees. So the Wasatch Mountains have lots of trees, lots of groves of trees, and lots of aspen trees. And so it would be really hard. You would be chopping down trees just to get past. So they're really struggling, and I understand why, because I've been there, and it's a very steep and steep, low, steep, low, steep, low. Like it's not very consistent. "The mountain you just crossed is nothing to the one ahead. Hastings had nothing good to say of the Wasatch Mountains. They'll break your wagons to pieces. You'll have to turn south until you come to another valley to the west." "What if there isn't one? How far south will we have to travel?" the teamsters began to question. You men were lost, weren't you? Are you trying to lose the rest of us?" At that, Big Mac began to swear and curse Hastings. "We might better have followed the devil." "The devil himself. Aye, that he is," Mr. Breen agreed. "Come now, Uncle Patrick," the men joked. "We would have seen his horns, wouldn't we?" "Unless you were blind to 'em. Traveling blind, that's what we're doing. This way we'll never get to California." They were discouraged now, the Breens, the Murphys, the Wolfingers, the Graves family, and all the young men working as teamsters and cattle drivers. Keseberg blamed Mr. Reed for their troubles, and some of the others agreed with him. The Eddies stood by him, and so did the Donners, who were themselves being blamed for bad leadership. "That palace wagon of yours is holding us up," Mary Graves said to Virginia. It was an unkind thing to say, but Virginia knew it was being whispered among the others. The family car of which she had been so proud had become a problem. Was it really holding them up? Virginia remembered how many oxen it had taken to pull it over the mountain. From the top they had glimpsed the Great Salt Lake, and it had not seemed so very far away. The mountains would soon be crossed, Virginia had thought then. But if they were really so steep, the only way was to go around them. Already the men were planning the new route they would take. The canyon they followed wound around among the hills. Every step of the way, heavy underbrush had to be cut and used as a roadbed. They toiled on, hacking their way through the woods and filling the ravines until they had reached the end of the canyon. There it looked as if they were trapped unless they abandoned their wagons. So we're going to stop right there. So they're really struggling to build a trail for themselves. The Oregon Trail that they could have stayed on if they hadn't have taken the shortcut. The Oregon Trail was an established trail, and it kind of went through on flat land that just had a little bit of hills. So if they would have stayed on that, they would have probably been farther than they are now after having taken the shortcut and having waited to find Hastings and then to wait while they built all of the trails and the roads. So they're really in big trouble. The more time they take, the closer they get towards winter. And they still have to cross the Wasatch Mountains, and they also have to cross the Sierra Nevada mountains. And unfortunately for them, this was one really weird year when it started to snow really early in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So it's August right now, and they don't have much more time until the snow is going to start in the mountains. And once that happens, it's going to be really hard to get their wagons up over the mountains in the snow. All right. And on that cheerful note, hope you have a good night.